Anonymous Soldier in the West, A Song of Geshu Han. As the 7 stars of the Dipper shine on him, Geshu Han carries his sword at night. The Tibetans have gone south with their herds of horses, afraid to venture past Lin Yao. So this is the last of the 5 word quatrains, and significantly, this is an anonymous poem. I think the anthology has a couple of these. So this is not the work of any famous Tang poet, and I think the translation also makes it pretty clear that that this is not a really complex or refined composition. It's just a pretty straightforward, probably genuinely popular ballad composed by one of the soldiers in the entourage of the Han General Geshu Han. It's just a very simple poem of praise, depicting the general as this brave guy illuminated by stars with a sword in his hand, tirelessly patrolling even at night and keeping the enemy afraid because of his reputation. So to understand a little bit more about the poem, first we should know a little bit more about Geshu Han. So Geshu Han was, as I just mentioned, one of the great generals of the Tang dynasty, especially during the reign of Emperor Xuanzong. His ancestors were of Turkic origin, but like many people in a similar condition, including the infamous An Lushan, who I think was Turkic or Parthian in his ancestry, many of those barbarians or semi-barbarians served in the Tang armies, and during the reign of Xuanzong, many of them managed to gain, almost the highest positions attainable. They were generals, they were yedushi, that is, military governors of vast swathes of the frontier area. Some of them were ennobled with aristocratic titles, and that was the case of Geshu Han. So Geshu Han, as I said, was a Tang dynasty general, pretty successful, especially in his campaigns against the Tibetans, which are mentioned here. Now, Tibetans in the time of the Tang were very different from what they were now. Tibet was then a united empire, and it was very militarily aggressive. It was, on par almost with the great Tang dynasty itself. That is to say, the Tang and the Tibetans had many wars and many conflicts during this period. In none of them was the Tang, really completely unbeatable and, just way over the top with respect to the Tibetans. So, our general, Geshu Han, was, to sum up, very successful in different campaigns that he led against the Tibetans. He was a Yedushi, I think, of the Gansu region, which is the straight corridor in the northwest of traditional China that joins the central regions with the heartland, and that is immediately adjacent to the northeastern border of the Tibetan territories. And, this poem praises his exploits, but, it's not completely made up. He was quite successful against the Tibetans. And he managed to get high positions and prestige in the years of the Tianbao era, that is the late period of Emperor Xuanzong. And there, when the An Lushan broke out, I think I mentioned he had a very bad relationship with An Lushan, so he was put in charge of the government forces defending some mountain passes to stop the rebels from getting into the heartland and the capital. They had already taken Luoyang, the eastern one, but they were advancing towards Chang'an. And there, because of some political bickerings and infightings, Geshu Han was forced against his better criterion to abandon the passes and slug it out in a massive battle against the rebels, which he lost. His army was completely annihilated, and he himself was made a prisoner and would be executed a couple of years, 1 or 2 years later after the defeat, by the rebels. In fact, he was canonized by Emperor Suzong as Wu Min, like Duke Wu Min, that is the martial and suffering. So Geshu Han, a portrait of a successful semi-barbarian, generally successful in spite of his unhappy ending, military commander of the Tang dynasty. So this poem, by its self-declaration, as we said, is the poem composed by some soldier or soldiers, a popular ditty in praise of their captain. So, this would be the type of composition that in all military camps, soldiers who really admire or appreciate their leader, compose, just to praise him and to feel, a little bit more confident in success and safety. So the topic of the poem is praise of the general, and I think there's nothing else. That praise is depicted in the first couplet through a very explicit, very visual image of the general under the stars, illuminated by them and holding a sword, and in the second couplet by indirectness, not through seeing the general, but through the effect the name of the general or his presence has on their enemies, on the Tibetans who flee at, just the fear of his name. So let's take a look. First couplet. As the 7 stars of the Dipper shine on him, Geshu Han carries his sword at night. So the first couplet is just a picture. We must imagine, it's a very visual image. We must imagine the general in his full garb with a shiny metallic sword in his hand, holding it, walking around under a clear, starry night. And, the 7 stars of the main constellation in the northern hemisphere illuminating him. Why the 7 stars of the Ursa Major are chosen as the light that illumines him and not the moon or some other constellation is something I do not know the reason for. Maybe the sword, the shiny sword, maybe bedecked with gems and probably made of some shiny metal with a shiny luster. Maybe the sword itself looks like the constellation. So perhaps there is that association intended, like our brave general under the Dipper, that is the Ursa Majoris. He's walking around and he seems to be carrying the constellation in his hands. That is his shiny sword ready to be used. And he is, of course, an image that would command admiration, respect, pride on the part of the soldiers that are probably, most of them asleep, but some of them keeping watch around fires and seeing their general appear from time to time. Second couplet. The Tibetans have gone south with their herds of horses, afraid to venture past Lingyao. I'm not exactly sure where Lingyao is. I think it's in the Gansu corridor that I think I mentioned area, which was the area where Geshu Han was Yedushi for a time. So the Tibetans dominated what today is modern Tibet and other territories, for example, the area of Qinghao. And at this time, groups of Tibetans frequently ransacked the territories of Gansu. They came in spring and summer. They took, or late summer probably, they took all the cereals of the harvest away and went south again. But there was a famous campaign in which Geshu Han hid his troops and managed to pounce on the Tibetans and kill them all. And after that, they didn't come for many years into the area. So I think that's it. This is, a pretty simple, pretty straightforward poem praising the military prowess of a general and his reputation. I would say it's pretty unusual, both in this collection and generally in Chinese classical poetry, because as we've mentioned a lot of times, the martial spirit is not a typical one to appear in Chinese classical poetry, even less so in poems composed by scholar officials. They always felt Wu should be subordinate to Wen. The military should always be subordinate to the civil. And already from the Shijing onwards, there's a very scarce tradition of poems that actually praise military deeds. And there's a very consolidated tradition of poems that present war always from its darkest characteristics and consequences, mainly as war seen from the point of view of the recruit or of the wife of the soldier who pines for his return, and he might return old or might not return at all and die in the wars. And we have, for every poem like this, that this poem is not explicitly praising war, but for every martial poem praising a valiant soldier or a valiant commander, in this anthology or elsewhere, we have 10 poems about the bones of the soldiers bleaching in the deserts of Central Asia. So, at least an unusual turn on the topic.